Welcome back to another episode of Just Read It, okay?
I'm M.
I'm C.
And I'm K.
We're so excited to jump into this section of chapters. We get some good, some bad, and some really bad. But we're finally going to the Night Court and the city that every fantasy book girly wants to visit, Velaris. Before we get there, we have to jump into a disaster. So let's dive into chapters 11 through 16. Chapter 11. We officially get our second visit to the Night Court. There were some issues getting to the Night Court this go around. Tamlin was being a butt considerably beforehand. But we are finally back at the Night Court for visit number 2, a full month after the first time Feyre has visited. I say visited, part of the bargain. As soon as we get there, Rhys's initial question before the night court has fully appeared around them, he is immediately asking what has happened because she has lost considerable amount of weight. As far as the way she looks like her guilt and grief and rage have been eating her alive, which is something he also questions. He attempts to pull her out of her misery, attempts to banter with her a little bit like they did the first time that they came to the Night Court, and she's not having it. She doesn't have the energy for it. She doesn't want to do it. And she's noticing that he is a little bit desperate and worried about her and the state that he's found her in this time around. And I love this part because she's like, don't you have other things to deal with as a High Lord? And he's like, yeah, of course I do. I'd love to just wipe everything clean so that I'd actually have a few moments of peace. And then he tells her, but I'll always make time for you, where Tamlin literally has never made time for her. He's never set time aside other than when he takes her off for them to have some sexy time in whatever field he plans to visit that day. Like, that's about the only thing that he actually sets time aside to do with her. And then Rhys asked what happened in the last week, because every time he tries to feel her or look for her across the bridge that is their bond, he says there is nothing there, that he should be able to feel her even while his shields are up. And he can't in some cases. Sometimes he'll tug on the bond just to see if she's alive because there's silence on the other side. He says the only time he heard something outside of that is when Tamlin got so upset that he blew up the study. And at that point, Rhys saw images of Feyre and Tamlin, and then it went blank again, silent. So he was concerned that something had happened, and rightfully so, because Tamlin blew up the study and didn't even care to protect Feyre. She had to protect herself. And then it's rage that she sees flickering in his eyes as he asks her about this because he's upset that she was threatened by someone who's supposed to love her, which makes perfect sense. Anyone who cares about her should be upset with the way Tamlin's been treating her. But she doesn't have a whole lot of people in her life that actually do care for her. So that entire concept is a novelty to her. Again, he tries to kind of banter with her, pick on her a little bit, get her to interact with him. And her response is, I just didn't care. I didn't care whatever was smoldering in my body, the magic that caused her to slip into Lucian's mind. She doesn't care. She asks where Moore is, and he tells her she's away on business. And then she tells him that she's not going to work with him. So the first time she went to the Night Court, he asked if she would work with him when it came to the war that's probably inevitable with Hybern. And she is just now giving him an answer of, no, I'm not going to be part of it. I don't want to be a weapon or a pawn for anybody. And in my opinion, there's no difference. It just depends on who's wielding me. And his response is, I want your help. I don't want to manipulate you. So I want to do the opposite of what the Spring Court is doing right now. And again, he wants her to ask why he wants her help, and she doesn't. Again, I didn't want to, didn't have the energy to. So this is her depression really coming forward, and we see it in the Spring Court where no one is trying to engage with her the same way Rhysand is trying to. But now we're even seeing it with him because it's gotten so bad. And she's gotten to a point where Tamlin has made exceptions for her safety and protection, and she's allowed to do a little bit more. And because of that, she doesn't want to jeopardize any part of that, which is ridiculous because the concessions that she's made are things that are basic human rights that he's taken away from her and getting some parts of that back, she is feeling that that is good enough and she doesn't want to do anything to jeopardize it.
I like how after, like right after you're talking about that moment where we see her depression and how it's sparked after she's doing the sentences with Reese, right after that scene, he tests her shields and she just goes, I had nothing better to do. She practiced because it was something she could
Right?
focus her mind on.
Because if we think about it, the only thing she's done up until this point, I think we talked about it in the last episode, was sleep, eat, throw everything up, and walk around. That's literally all she's been able to do and all she's allowed to do. Plan the wedding, whatever. That's not a huge thing because she lets Ianthe do most of it. But yes, Reese is the only one who's actually given her something to do. So now she's read a ton because that's the only thing she has left, and she's worked on her shields. When you have nothing else to do and you're not allowed to do anything else, then you're going to do the only thing you're allowed to as much as possible. So, yes, he does give her additional work, things to work on. She does all of it. She reads more books. Pretty much, she reads an entire book. That's one of the first books she actually makes it through is in her week at the night court. And when he comes back, the day before he's going to take her home, he pleads with her, what can I do to help? Tell me what I can do. Months and months, and you're still a ghost. Does no one there ask what is happening? Does your High Lord simply not care? So this is where we start to see Feyre, I think, get a sense that this is a toxic relationship between her and Tamlin. This is not how it's supposed to be because she's starting to see how bad it's really getting, but it's a little bit at a time, piece by piece. And her response is, of course, Tamlin does care. He's given me space to sort it out. And his response is, well, obviously that's not helping, so let me help. We went through enough under the mountain together. And then she flinches, so he stops talking. And that's where his response is, then she wins. Amarantha wins if you let yourself fall apart. And this is a completely different reason than what Tamlin gave her for letting Amarantha win earlier in the book. Because Tamlin says, if we dwell on it, if we focus on what happened, then she wins. If we don't move past it, then she wins. And Rhysand is kind of taking it away and saying, well, if you don't deal with it, you're not going to move past it, and therefore she's going to win. So I like that we have the different perspectives from the two of them, and that's just one of the many differences between Rhys and Tamlin and how they handle their relationship, whatever it might be, with Feyre. And we finally get her reacting to a little bit of his. She tells him this conversation is over, and he's like, no, it's not. So for her, not hot temper, but ice glittering rage that she could almost feel that ice in her fingertips kissing my palms, and I swore there was frost coating the book before I hurled it at his head. Of course, he shields to protect himself, and the book bounces away and slides across the floor. But at that point, he's just like so excited that she's finally responding to him that he's like, okay, what else? What's next, Feyre? And so at that point, her ice melts into flame and her fingers curled into fists. And the High Lord of the Night Court honestly looked relieved at the sight of it. So he is so excited to see the wrath and the rage and the burn because it is for once a feeling that she's having, not the hollow, cold silence that has been her existence at the spring court. But at that point, she remembers that at the spring court, she is so contained, and just the thought of that makes her sink back into herself and no longer feel anything, which I think is huge, that just the thought of it has that kind of effect on her. That's about the last interaction we get with Rhysand and Feyre before he takes her back to the spring court. Tamlin is outside waiting for them, instead of just in the study for whenever they get back. The second she gets there and sees Tamlin's face, her immediate thought is, no longer will I have the chance to roam on my own. There won't be solitary rides or walks through the grounds. She knows, based on the way Tamlin looks, that things are going right back to where they were. And Rhys's response right before he leaves is, fight it. Actually try again. But she doesn't have the energy at this point. She's past that. She doesn't care anymore. She is just going to wallow in her grief. And of course, the next morning, the sentries returned in full force. So, chapter 12, we get the big, terrible scene that everyone hates reading about. Her first week back, she's not allowed to leave the house. So that's the first step. There are guards inside the house. She can't go anywhere without them. She can tell that Lucian wants to help, but that his loyalty is still to Tamlin, and he's not going to help because of that. I think it's interesting, and I'm going to point it out because we're going to see, again, a difference with the Night Court in a couple of chapters. But she talks about Tamlin's friends and like his court or those that are around him now that they're no longer under the mountain. And she mentions that Tamlin sent them home so that there's no one else around the manor. He did it to protect her, but she's happy that she doesn't have to interact with them or try and remember their names, who they are, what they do, because she doesn't care enough for any of that. But I like that she says, I know he liked having his friends around, but I'd found that they all talked to each other like they were sparring partners, pretty words masking sharp-edged insults. So they're not really friends. They're like the mean girl friends, is how I'm going to describe them, because we just watched Mean Girls last week. They're like the mean girls who are jabbing at each other, but they still call themselves friends. They still have a relationship and a past. They still have inside jokes together, but they're not family. We'll put it that way. They're not friends that are close enough that they're family, which is the opposite of what we'll see with the Night Court in a couple chapters. I love that we finally get Feyre being a book girly, because we mentioned in book 1 that she hated the smell of books. Now she is reading consistently because she says the characters in the books are her only friends. She doesn't feel so alone with the characters in these books. So that is all she can do. And that is all she has been doing, is burning through books every day, stories about people and places I'd never heard of. And I would love to know that, like, are any of these books that she's reading books that Aelin would have read, because Aelin was such a book girly too? Are any of these books cross the universe or cross the Massverse? Like, that would just be fun to see if their taste in books is similar, or if at this point Faye was just reading everything. She doesn't go into detail as to specifically what kind of books Feyre reads, but she goes through quite a few books. Lucian also noticed that she is growing claws at one point. So we have a couple different powers that we've seen come out of her so far. We've seen her hands burn the table, so fire. We've seen the wind shield that she put around her when Tamlin blew up the study. We've seen the ice cold when she froze the book, and started to kind of go back into fire at that point. But now we are also starting to see some shape shifting, in the sense that her fingers are turning into claws. She is able to make it stop, but Lucian sees they kind of go off to a forgotten study in the house to talk about it, and Lucian's like, well, I'll try again to ask if we can train you so that you have a grip on these powers, because they will manifest whether we train you or not. So let's go ahead and train you so that you have an edge, so that you don't drown with them. And Feyre's response is, okay, great, but nothing's actually going to come of it, so whatever. She just walks right out. She comes down for dinner a few hours later and overhears Lucian asking Tamlin and Ianthe about it, and the response is no. We get a little bit more understanding of how much Tamlin relies on Ianthe and how much her opinion sways his choices. We started seeing it in the last couple of chapters, but we're seeing it even more now. She is the one speaking against Lucian, and Lucian is still speaking for Feyre, but Tamlin is choosing Ianthe's side, which is against Feyre. There is again some back and forth discussion about Feyre's children. And I know we touched on it a little bit in the last episode, because of who she has become, being resurrected and reborn by the Seven High Lords, that she or her children might be coveted, or the children that High Lords could have with her. So Ianthe brings this up, that other High Lords, if they found out, would potentially want her and attempt to take her just to have children with her. The part of the discussion that she hears as well is that Rhysand is probably the only High Lord who could get away with doing that. So I think we have a little foreshadowing, not in regards to their children, but some foreshadowing into what's going to happen in like the next chapter, with Rhysand being able to take her away and not bring her back, and he being the only High Lord who can get away with that, and actually whether any sort of storm that the spring court or any other court could weather on him and the night court because of his strength. Lucian fights back, says that's stupid. Rhysand is not stupid. He's not going to do that. But Ianthe's response is, yes, he will, because she really hates Rhysand. And she tells them, remember all of the things that he's already poisoned her mind with, all the things he's already said in regards to his hatred for Hybern. So again, this is where Ianthe's trying to kind of slide in there her relationship with Hybern and make that sound like the better option compared to Rhysand. She doesn't outright say it, but she does mention things like, there are some friends that I made across the sea who might be able to help us. But again, Tamlin's response is still no. So that is the first night that she locks her bedroom door and Tamlin does not come to her. The next morning she comes down and she's had it. She's decided, I am going to do something. I don't care what he says or does. I'm getting out of the house. So she ends up coming down and Lucian and Tamlin are about to head out because there's activity on the western sea border side where Hybern is. So she wants to go with them. He says no. So she said, okay, I'll just wait until they leave and then I will go follow. And Tamlin can kind of read her facial expressions and figures out that that's what she's going to do. So he says, no, you're not leaving. You're not going to follow us. You're not leaving this house. He puts a shield around the entire house. Others can come and go. You can see and hear outside the shield. It's essentially invisible, but she is not able to leave. She tries walking out the door, meets a shield of air. She tries opening a window and push her hand out the window, again, is met with that shield of air. And then she panics, obviously, because she's had issues with small enclosed spaces for months, multiple months. I mean, we're like 4 or 5 months past Under the Mountain, and she still isn't over being able to go into tight or small spaces. And now he has literally locked her into their home. She starts begging because she's completely having a panic attack and breaking down. And his response is, just deal with it. Stay here where you're safe. This is when she realizes the girl that she had been, the one who needed protection and craved stability and comfort, she had died under the mountain. And there had been no one to protect her from those horrors before her neck snapped. So she had done it herself because Tamlin didn't do anything under the mountain. Rhysand helped, but in the end, Feyre is the one who had to do it. So she says, I've done it myself and I could not yield that part of me that had awoken and transformed under the mountain. That Tamlin had gotten his powers back and become whole again, become the protector and provider he wished to be. And she was no longer the human girl who needed coddling and pampering, didn't want luxury or easiness. She didn't know how to go back to craving those things. So she's finally realized kind of what the issue is, that she is no longer what Tamlin wants her to be or thinks she should be. And that just like amplifies her panic attack and her need to get out. Lucian is watching the whole thing. Tamlin at this point is walking away and has winnowed away and isn't paying attention. Lucian said, just give him some more time. Let me talk to him. We'll figure it out. Just give him more time. And she can't. She is completely breaking down, which is understandable because he had trapped her in here. There was a crushing black pounding down. It rose up from beneath, devouring and roaring and shredding. So she decides that she is going to attempt to winnow because Rhys has explained to her what winnowing is, and she's never tried it, has never been trained to do it, but she thinks this is her only way out, is to be able to winnow. So she attempts to do it, and what she ends up doing is really just taking darkness and wrapping it around herself while she's screaming. So she is screaming, is in complete darkness. None of the sentries can see her. No one knows what's going on because she is in the darkness, completely engulfed. Finally, she hears people shouting her name. She assumes it's Amarantha, that Amarantha has come to finally claim her and kill her. It's not. It's Mor who has come in. Rhys has broken the shield around the house, but it's Mor who comes in, walks in on her own 2 feet, picks her up. It's Alice who's screaming her name, trying to get to her. Alice says to Mor, please take care of her. And Mor's response is, consider yourselves very, very lucky your High Lord was not here when we arrived. And she tells them that the guards are knocked out. They're going to have headaches, but no one's hurt. They're all fine. I did forget to mention, while she was encased in the cocoon of darkness, all of her powers manifesting at this point. It's a cocoon of darkness, fire, ice, wind, and it melted the ring, her engagement ring, off her finger until the gold ore dripped away into the void, the emerald tumbling after it. So we'll come back to what happened with that later on, but Moore picks her up and starts carrying her out of the house, just repeating over and over again, you're free, and you're out, you're free. And Farah's initial response is not safe, not protected, but free. They end up going into a cave and she starts freaking out for a little bit, but then they come out in presumably the summer court, and that's where Rhysand is. Moore hands her off to Rhysand, tells him that she's done everything by the book, which we'll find out why that had to be later on. It's Rhysand who has her, and she says, a sweeter, softer shade of night caressed me, stroking my nerves, my lungs, until I could at last get air inside, until it seduced me into sleep. So this is Rhysand's darkness, his night court power that is calming her, giving her a chance to breathe, and then coaxing her to sleep so that she can recover from this massive panic attack episode that she just had. Terrible chapter.
It was definitely a hard one to get through.
Definitely.
I'd say
Especially
between
when
the
you do
two
it 3
books,
times.
yeah, I'd say between the two books, the hardest one so far out of where we're at so far in our book.
The only extra thing that I had in a little bit more into Lucian, that he's still blindly obeying Tamlin, whether he believes Tamlin's right or not. Even when he tries to help, I mean, he doesn't really do a whole lot. So I saw a theory the other day that one of the new books coming is going to be about Lucian based on the color. And then it went into, Lucian's mask being the fox mask and how foxes are very cunning and they really only serve themselves. And it just makes me wonder if that's kind of who Lucian is. That yes, he follows and obeys Tamlin to an extent, but he does push boundaries, and he's the only one in the Spring Court that actually does that, whether it's for good or not. And I mention it too because in the first book, he is the one to push Feyre and Tamlin together and gets them to actually fall in love. Like it is Lucian saying certain things so that when Tamlin says certain things, Tamlin's words sound better than Lucian's. So it just makes me wonder as we go through the rest of this book and the next book, is Lucian really devoted to Tamlin, or is he just devoted to Tamlin right now because that serves his purpose best? And I think we see that very clearly in book 3 when he completely switches.
I remember my first read through. Lucian was a question mark for me a lot of the way through. I felt like I couldn't get a read on him because you get the sycophantic, I'm going to follow you no matter what. But then with the wavering later on, you wonder, is he doing it for self-preservation?
Right.
Some sort of existent bond, or is it something further on that we don't know yet from his past trauma that we
Exactly.
haven't explored?
Right, because we know he has past trauma with his family, because apparently families around High Lords are just like terrible people.
All of them.
Everyone's family. Tamlin's, Rhysand's, Lucian's, pretty much they're all terrible.
Get rid of the
At
High
least at
Lord
this
family.
point. Right? Not the High Lords. Well,
Just
Tamlin we can live
wow.
without, but some of them. We know he's trained in court intrigue. That's part of why he is the emissary for Tamlin, because Tamlin isn't trained in that. So it just makes me wonder, like, how deep does that really go with Lucian? And is he only there to serve himself? Is he there to serve the Autumn Court in some way, since that's where he's from? Or is it that he actually wants to serve Tamlin and his court? I don't know. We'll keep reviewing it as we go through and we see Lucian more. Okay, we are finally out of the Spring Court. Woo! We have made it to the Night Court. So exciting. Feyre wakes up in the same palace on top of the mountain in the Night Court that Rhys has previously brought her to. He does this because he doesn't know about the other areas of his court, but also because this is where she's familiar and he wants her to wake up in a space that is not new to her. So she wakes up and kind of clears her throat, and he immediately turns to her, is at her attention. He is exhausted, rightfully so, and relieved when he sees that she's awake. We get like a little heart to heart with them because Rhysand's response to her, "You were screaming, that's why her throat hurts. You managed to scare every single sentry and servant in the manor when you wrapped yourself in darkness and they couldn't see you." Of course, she is worried that she hurt somebody because that's who Feyre is. She didn't, and he assures her that she didn't hurt anybody. And then he explains what happened between him and Moore. By law and protocol, they had to do things a certain way to avoid issues in the future. So we don't know exactly what those laws say. He was able to smash the shield around the house from a distance, which he was allowed to do, but that Moore had to walk in on her own 2 feet. She had to render the sentries unconscious with her own power, her own abilities. Moore had to carry Feyre over the border into another court before Rhysand could come and take her back to the Night Court. And this is all done because if he hadn't done it that way, then Tamlin would have every right. He would have free reign to march his forces into the Night Court to reclaim her, and Rhysand has no interest in waging an internal war when they have everything else going on. So that's why he says they had to do it by the book. And her response is, "When I go back, what's going to happen?" And he says, "This is not part of our bargain. You don't have to go back unless you want to," which is a huge deal for her, that she actually has the choice of whether she wants to go back or not. Then she tells him, "He locked me in that house." And this is where we see another little bit of Rhysand's anger and rage that's similar to Tamlin's, but he is much better at controlling it. We see that manifest in the shadow of his mighty wings start to form, which we've seen when she visits with him in the past. The shadowy mighty wings spread behind Rhys's chair, but his face was calm as he said, "I know, I felt you, even with your shields up," that he felt her panic because she was being locked up. They discuss she doesn't have anywhere to go, and Rhysand says, "Well, I offered for you to work with me, so you can do that, and I owe you already, so we'll just figure everything else out day by day." So he already commits to helping her improve, even if it just means figuring out one day at a time, which is leaps and bounds more than what Tamlin and the Spring Court has done for her so far. So this is literally within, like 12 hours? We'll say 24 hours of being removed from the Spring Court. He is offering a job. He is offering money, a house, food. He's offering jewels and things as well. Not that she cares, because she's proven she doesn't care about material things. She just wants to do something, and he's offering that immediately. And then she decides she's not going back. She thinks maybe she never really got to come back after Under the Mountain. And then they start talking about some of the powers. Rhysand confirmed the darkness she wrapped herself in was most likely from him. The wind shield that she used is probably from the day court. Obviously, ice is from winter, fire is from autumn. She asks about winnowing, if that's confined to a specific court. He says no, that just depends on your power and your training. So that is something, that we're kind of getting an idea that that's something Feyre wants to train for in the future. Rhys goes to walk away and give Feyre some time to kind of rest and recover, and she doesn't want to because she knows if he walks away to do whatever he needs to go do, she's going to be stuck in this house. And it's arguably different from the Spring Court, but she's still stuck with nothing to do. And her immediate response before she can even think about it is, "Take me with you. Please just take me with you." And this is where we see a little bit of a glimpse into Rhysand being a actual High Lord of the Night Court, because he says, if you do this, you cannot talk to anyone about what you see. And we find out that it's because he's taking her to the city of Valaris, and Valaris is not known to anyone outside of the Night Court. So he explains to her, if you leave, if you ever go back to the Spring Court, any other court, it doesn't matter what their friendship or relationship looks like. If she leaves, she can never talk about it. And she understands and says, okay. So he takes her to Valaris, the city of Starlight, which we love. Well, they have made it to Valaris. We are in Rhys's townhouse. We get a description of the townhouse. He says that he and Moore are the only two, and now Feyre, who are able to get into the townhouse. It's locked to everybody else. One of those three lets them in. The only other people there are the two handmaidens that Feyre is familiar with. So they are the ones who are going to continue to dress her or help her get ready, that kind of thing. There are a couple people that come to the door and get annoyed that they're locked out. And we're going to meet them in the next chapter when she has dinner with them. But Reese says, go nap, relax for a little bit, rest, because you still look a little peaky from her episode, Panic Attack. We're going to have dinner later with my friends. We'll go from there. So just go rest and then we'll deal with everything afterwards. So she goes up the stairs with the two handmaidens. She does ask them some questions because she says, well, I better at least give myself the illusion of caring about my welfare. So I'll ask them a couple questions. She asks who's at the front door, and they tell her, that's Reese's inner circle, his court, those he's closest to. She asks, how did the city survive? And they're like, Rhysand has been devoted to his people even before he became High Lord. And they don't want to give her more information. And her initial response is, did he tell you not to tell me? And they say, no, it's better for him to tell you because he has all the information and we don't want to get it wrong. So it's a complete opposite from Tamlin telling others not to tell her things versus these two are so devoted to Rhysand, they don't want to get the story incorrect. And because they know, there are some intimate parts of it for Rhysand, that it's probably best for him to tell her. And I love the end of chapter 14 when she's finally resting and she thinks, well, maybe Amarantha won after all. And then some strange new, not old, not existing, some strange new part of me wondered if my never returning might be a fitting punishment for Tamlin for what he had done to me. Finally, she is to a point where she is upset with him.
And it's acknowledging that she's not at fault. It's not her guilt. It's not her. It's that reborn. We all go through different phases of life where you acknowledge through the change that, hey, I changed. I went through this. And it's her finally acknowledging maybe it's been awful, but maybe there's something there to keep me
Right?
going.
Maybe it's not just me, or maybe I'm not the main issue. Yeah,
I'm not the problem.
exactly. So she does nap for a couple hours and then she comes down. And she comes down right in time for Reese's friends, the inner circle, to leave. He takes her out on a walk through the city. And she is completely shocked that this city has not been touched. Reese tells her no one has breached the walls of the city in over 5,000 years. So well past the 50 years of Amarantha's rule. And that is all because Rhysand's ruthless, very ruthless ancestors set up Valaris in an attempt to preserve a piece of goodness in our wretched world. So well over 5,000 years ago, all of this happened. We talked about just a little bit ago how terrible most of the High Lord families are, and yet there was something in someone in the past in the Night Court that said, I'm going to do something, at least in this city, that's different. And the mechanics of this city, the environment of it, it is so different from what we saw in the Spring Court. So Reese walks her through it, answering tons of questions. It is obviously gorgeous. It's a huge city, has so many different sections to it. Rhysand talks about, the multiple different palaces. Those are the markets where different things are sold, and there's a river that runs through it, and there are some of the markets on one side, some are on the other side. It just depends on what you're looking for as far as which market you go to. The whole city is wrapped and surrounded by mountains. This is one of the major mountains that we talk about in Prythian. One major mountain was under the mountain, the section in the middle. And then this is another mountain, the House of Wind, is built into this mountain. So this is Rhysand's official seat when he's in Valaris. It's his official house. His townhouse is his personal house for his family, whereas this is for his court and is called the House of Wind and is literally built into this mountain.
So cool.
I love it because when they're talking about the mountains and looking at them, she says they were sleeping giants, somehow alive, awake, as if in answer, that undulating, slithering power slid along my bones like a cat brushing against my legs for attention. And that's when Reese tells her the middle peak, that is the House of Wind, his other home in the city. And there are literally holes, windows built into the face of the mountain. And I love her description of it because we know in future books there is definitely a magic to the house, and this is the first time we see it. And we didn't realize it, at least I didn't, in past reads, that she feels that magic brush up against her, that magic from the house. She asks, why was this city saved? How was it saved? And that's when Rhysand tells her about his ruthless ancestors wanting to preserve a piece of goodness. This is the first time Feyre has ever sworn to the cauldron in the entire series. She says, "Cauldron, it was enormous. I jerked my chin toward the city sloping down toward the river." That's the first time she's ever used the cauldron word, name like that. Everybody else swears to the cauldron. Lucian does it all the time. This is the first time Feyre's actually doing it. And I think it's interesting because in book one, we talked about the lack of gods, and therefore the cauldron wasn't really a part of her world until she came to Prythian. So this is kind of the progression of Feyre and her beliefs as she is now high fae, and as she's living and going through Prythian. And she asks, so what is worth saving at the cost of everyone? And Rhysand's response, his blue eyes were as ruthless as the churning winter sea in the distance. Everything is what he says. Everything is worth it. And she comes to agree that Valaris is everything. They don't go to see some of the theaters, but he shows her there is an entire section that's called the Artist Quarter or the Rainbow of Valaris. And it's these beautiful, very colorful houses and townhouses and shops. Tons of painters, sculptors. And just to give us an idea of how big the city of Valaris is, Rhysand says that the one theater that they can see is the main one, but that there are 5 notable theaters in the city. 5. So we're talking like New York City level. There are 5 notable ones, but there are smaller theaters and an amphitheater on the sea cliffs. So like that just goes to show how big this city is and how insane it is to think about Rhysand and his ancestors keeping that city protected for so many years. That the size of the city is so big that it's incredible to think of how much power and warding went into protecting it and keeping it out of the minds of everyone else in Prythian and in the entire world. Feyre gets to a point where she can't deal with the city anymore. It is everything she is lacking right now. It is life and color and joy and peace, and she can't handle that anymore. She's happy, like she's coming to terms with the fact that it is in this world. Slowly, very slowly, she's coming to terms with that. But because of what she had to go through that none of these people had to go through, presumably. I mean, she's definitely being a little prejudiced right now. But because of all of that, and because she's seeing it, she is struggling to cope with what she had to go through. So at this point, she is getting almost to where she wants to scream. Her magic is kind of roiling inside her again. But Rhys, being who he is, just calm down, relax. He obviously doesn't say calm down because he's not an idiot, but he says easy, easy. My people are blameless. And that's when she's like, okay, you're right. And if these were my people, I would do everything I could to protect them, just like he has. She says she wants to go home, and he says, okay, we actually need to go back to get ready for our dinner with my inner circle. The reason he wants her to meet his inner circle is because he wants her to decide if she actually wants to work with them and to figure out what the inner circle will be to her, how they can work with her, how are they going to get along, that kind of thing. But Rhys wants her to meet them and judge that for herself and make that choice on her own. So again, he's giving her choice where she hasn't had that in the past. He gives her a little bit of information, at least in regards to Amren and the hierarchy of his inner circle before they get there. So he says, Amren is my second in command. He kind of warns her. She is like a fire drake when it comes to her jewels, so don't steal anything from her. Not that Feyre wants jewels, but it's still a nice warning anyway. And then he tells her that Mor is his third, and that anyone who thinks the Illyrian warriors are his apex predators are idiots. So it essentially goes Rhysand, Amren, his cousin Mor, and then 2 Illyrian warriors, Cassian and Azriel. Amren looks like a high fae, but she isn't, and he can't really describe it to her. He just says, when you see her, you'll know. Rhysand tells her, don't steal from Amren, don't pick any fights with her. Don't provoke her. I know you have a temper. I mean, in all honesty, all of these people have tempers to an extent in the right situation. But he's like, just be on your guard with her. And Farrah's response, I love it. She's like, well, what? Are we going to like brawl if I rip off her necklace and then she'll roast and eat me? And he's like, no, she's going to do much worse if that's the case. That Amren and Moore got into it once and they completely leveled his favorite mountain retreat. That's the level of their power. And then he says, for what it's worth, I'm the most powerful High Lord in Prythian's history, and merely interrupting Amren is something I've only done once in the past century. So that kind of puts into perspective Amren's character before we get to meet her. Farrah does have a dark thought in the sense that she thinks maybe it would just be better not to deal with this. Maybe it would just be a mercy if things were ended, if she was no longer alive. And Rhysand has an immediate reaction of, no, don't ever think that. Like, you are worth more than that. And he is completely livid with her train of thought. And he says, don't for one moment think about that. Think about yourself in that way. And at that point, she accidentally, again, slips into his mind, just like she did with Lucian. Powers that she's gotten that are manifesting, getting a little bit stronger each day. So she kind of slides into his mind and sees herself through his eyes and is just utterly shocked at how terrible she now looks. So she describes herself very similarly to how she described herself in the very beginning of book 1 when they were on the verge of starving. So she's right back to where she was. And she looks like the rage, the grief, the despair had eaten her alive, just like Rhysand had asked a couple chapters ago. So he saw it a couple chapters ago. Now she is finally seeing that in herself. And then Rhysand is just like, how did you do that? How did you get past my shields? Because he's the most powerful High Lord of all time. And yet, someone who is not trained arguably doesn't have as much power as he does. She was able to just slip right in. She says, oh, well, I just kind of slipped. That's the best way she can describe it. And his response is, well, that's interesting. I guess if you have a part of me, a part of my power in you, that my mental shields mistook you for me, which we see a little hint of that being the case. And that's a little foreshadowing into other things that are going to happen in this book, as far as she has a piece of that High Lord, and some items, some people might mistake her power for the High Lord because it's a piece of them. That's when Rhysand explains that they are called Demati, when you are able to go into another person's mind, that they're very rare. He encourages her to continue training to build her shields, because if she ever encounters one and her shields are down, the Deamati could just enter her mind, take whatever they want, and even control her, and she wouldn't even know it. So that also gives us a little bit more insight into the vast power that Rhysand has, that he could enter someone's mind and control it without that person even knowing. And I think now that I've just mentioned that, does that tie us into, in Throne of Glass, saw the collars put around Dorian specifically, because he's the one whose perspective we actually get. That Volg is in his head and he knows it. So to me, that's a clear difference between Rhysand and the Volg, despite there being some, fan theories that Rhysand might be Volg, or at least part Volg. So interesting. Throwing it out there. Okay. They both change. She gets all prettied up, wears a dress because she thinks she needs to. If this is like Tamlin's court, then she needs to dress nice for this dinner. Rhysand is telling her that they have to fly there, and since she doesn't have wings at this point, he has to carry her as they fly over. They can't winnow there because the house is warded against that. So they have some little banter between them that I absolutely love. I just want to underline all of the parts in the book where they're bantering back and forth. But I love this part because he's like, well, I'm not going to drop you. I promise not to. Nothing's going to happen to you. And she's like, the wind is going to rip my gown off. And his response is this feline grin, like, okay, because it's Rhysand and we love him. And her immediate response is, I'll take the stairs. The 10,000 steps that it takes to actually get up the mountain to the house, she's like, no, instead of dealing with you and your nonsense, I'll just take the stairs. She goes to walk away. His wings come out and kind of curve around her, trying to herd her back towards him. At one point, she feels encased by them and starts to lock up because she feels she's being caged. Immediately, he opens the wings back up so she doesn't feel that way. And eventually, he talks her into, we have to do this. You have to meet my friends before you agree. And there's no way to do it other than up at the mountain because he needs to control the situation, at least to an extent. And the house is big enough to be able to hold their personalities. So she finally agrees, and he just like shoots up into the sky, just takes off. She does freak out just a little bit. He tells her, I thought there'd be a lot more screaming. Maybe I'm not doing a good enough job of trying to terrorize you as we're flying, which I think is really funny because that's foreshadowing for him carrying somebody else in the next book and making them scream. But she doesn't scream. He does swerve around a little bit and they go a little bit faster on an updraft and he's having fun. She is at this point having a little bit of fun too. She doesn't really want to recognize that. She mentions that his parents must have been thrilled with him and his desire to fly all over the place. And this is where we get a little bit of insight on his mom, that some nights she would come in and catch him about to jump out the window to fly around the city, and she would join him. And this is when we know that Rhysand's mom is no longer alive. They start their little game, and it's a little game that they continue throughout most of the series, and it is essentially a truth for a truth. She is thinking, and he wants her to tell him what she's thinking. He says, "What's on your mind?" I'll say a thing, you say a thing. Give me just one thought. So he kind of goes through a list and says, I was locked under the mountain for 50 years and I let myself dream of this place, but I never thought I would be able to come back to it. So, one, we get a little snippet into the despair that he dealt with for 50 years, and yet he's still able to do everything that he can and is still able to help her, even after he had to deal with that for 50 years when Tamlin had to deal with it for like 4 months, and that's it. He also says, I'm thinking that I wish I had been the one to slaughter Amarantha, and I'm thinking if war comes, it might be a long time before I get to have a night like this with his family. She responds, says, because there's no one around, because they're so high up above the city that maybe she feels like she can be honest with him. So she says, I'm thinking that I was a lonely, hopeless person and I might have fallen in love with the first thing that showed me a hint of kindness and safety. And I'm thinking that maybe Tamlin knew that, maybe not actively, but maybe he wanted to be that person for someone. And maybe that worked for who I was before, but it doesn't work for who and what I am now. So I think we finally see Feyre realizing that she and Tamlin are not right for each other at this point. They may have been back before Under the Mountain, but I think even then, because we talked about it through book 1, that she was already feeling like she would be bored in the spring court if she didn't have anything to do. And that was before we got to Under the Mountain. So now she's kind of realized that she's changed even more than that and cannot go back to who she was before. They get to the House of Wind, and Cassian and Azriel are there to welcome them. We get a lot of information in this next chapter. Some fun banter between all of the inner circle, but a lot of information on who they are, how they got to know each other, the kind of things that Feyre is asking questions on so that she can get to know them and figure out where she would fit in and how they would work together if she agreed. And I love that Cassian's first comment to her is, come on, Feyre, we don't bite unless you ask us to. And we've talked about so many times how much there is not actual biting in the series, but how much it's mentioned and people's different perspectives on what would happen if biting took place. So I love that he doesn't know that any of that stuff took place. Like Rhysand knows a little bit of what happened with her and Tamlin, but Cassian doesn't know that. So I think it's so funny that that's what he brings up. And then Rhysand's immediate response is, last I heard, no one's ever taken you up on that offer. And then Feyre turns around and is just like, why? He's so attractive. Like, that's her next thought. So then we get a description of Cassian and Azriel both being Illyrian warriors. Essentially, they are from a race of warriors, pretty messed up warriors to begin with. They have a lot of bad habits and rituals and rites on their own. So we do get a lot of information on all of that. but we'll get to that in a minute. Asriel is essentially the spy master. So he is what is called a shadow singer, assuming he can speak to the shadows and they speak to him. Mor steps in and she is in this gorgeous red dress, and Asriel is kind of looking her up and down, and Feyre's watching. And Feyre notices a part of shadow kind of curl around Asriel's ear. And as soon as that happens, Asriel's attention focuses on Feyre because we're assuming that the shadow told him she was watching. And so she immediately puts on a mask, a bland face. And I think this is really interesting, and it may play into some theories that we talk about later on. But Rhysand, Cassian, and Asriel kind of all call themselves brothers in the sense that most bastard-born brothers of a sort. So Rhysand isn't bastard born, but his mom was Illyrian and his dad was High Fae. According to all the High Fae in the Night Court, being an Illyrian is essentially like being bastard. Cassian was a bastard. His mom was a laundry woman. His father, we have no idea who he was. Either the mother doesn't remember or chose not to tell anyone. And then we also have Asriel, who is, we're told he is also a bastard, but we don't know who his mother is. We are told that one of the high ups, like princes of one of the Illyrian camps, is his father, and he was thrown out at a certain point. Cassian is the one who commands Rhys's armies. Feyre points out that they are calling her Rhysand's friend or a friend of Rhysand. They're not calling her savior. They're not calling her a murderer or a human fairy thing. They're simply saying Rhysand's friend, which is so much more than what she's been called in the past because it's more positive than some things she's been called, but it also doesn't put her on a pedestal or put expectations on her, like when they call her curse breaker or savior of the lands. So I love that they've done in this small set of interactions, initially meeting her, they have done so many things to kind of put her at ease and set them apart from the spring court that it's incredible, just in these few pages. Favorite does kind of snap back at Cassian a little bit, which is Cassian's immediate response is, okay, great, we can be friends because you're not going to let me get away with anything. That's when Mor walks in and she's like, okay, great. Somebody's roasting Cassian because that needs to happen regularly. So we get a sense that everybody in his inner circle is very much like a family. They treat each other like siblings. And that is completely different than Tamlin's court. At this point, we get Amren. She is this adorable little creature that is super freaking scary. Like, we don't know what she is, what her power is, but Feyre's bones, like inside, her instinct is telling her to run and hide. That Amren was several inches shorter than her with chin-length black hair. So again, very petite little woman, but her eyes, silver eyes, were unlike anything I'd ever seen. A glimpse into the creature that I knew in my bones wasn't High Fae or hadn't been born that way. The silver in Amren's eyes seemed to swirl like smoke under glass, and that the High Lord beside me, so the most powerful High Lord in all of Prythian's history, was a wisp of shadow compared to the power thrumming off of her. So, like, that is an insane amount of power. We've gotten things that give us an understanding of how incredible Rhysand's power is, but to compare her to him so that we see the extent of her power just goes above and beyond in how powerful she really is. And later on, she describes in Amren's enchanting eyes like leashed lightning. And I love that. Visually, I think that is such a cool way to describe her eyes. And Amren says, so there are two of us now, which is very interesting for her to say. She says, we were born something else and found ourselves trapped in new, strange bodies. So it's giving us a little insight into Amren's past because we don't know how she came to be, where she came from, anything along those lines. And then Amren goes so far as to say there is actually a third of us as well. I don't think, and then she turns to Rhysand, I don't think you've heard from Mirian in centuries, and that's very interesting. And Cassian, being Cassian, is like, just get to the point, Amren, I'm hungry. Just say what you're trying to say so we can go eat. That's when we get a little info on the other human who was made, and her name is Miriam. She was made into an immortal, and Amren says, interesting that it should happen again right as all the ancient players have returned. But Miriam was gifted with long life, not a new body. Let me pause before I go into that. She says, made into an immortal. So Amren, Miriam, and Feyre are one of three, set of three. Don't give me that face, Emily. You know where I'm going. They are a set of three that were made. And this is the first time we've heard made in this series, but it's not the last time we're going to hear it. And it's going to become more important as we go. But when she says, interesting that it should happen again right as all the ancient players have returned. And we get such similar descriptions and words in Throne of Glass. When certain people are talking about Aelin being the heir of fire, Manon being both a witch, Iron Teeth and Kraken, that we have Dorian, who has a crazy amount of power that's undefined, and you have Rowan, who's the most powerful fae in their world in years. You have Lorcan, who's the most powerful half-breed in centuries. And you have all of them converging in the same place. Obviously, that series is over. We finished it last year, and crazy things like predestined things happened in that book. So it makes me wonder, because she's wording it this way, is there other predestined things that are going to happen throughout this series or further on as we continue through the series and into Crescent City as well? Amren says Miriam was only gifted with long life, whereas Feyre was gifted a new body. And she sniffs Feyre a couple of times throughout this whole chapter, but she sniffs her again. And then her eyes light with surprise, and she turns to Rhysand, and Rhys just nods. Feyre's not sure what this means, but Amren has discovered something in Feyre that Rhysand either knows or thinks, but we don't know what it is. So we're not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil that for later on in the book. But Amren goes on and says, your very blood, your veins, your bones were made a mortal soul in an immortal body. So the only part of her that is still her is her soul. Everything else, every other part of her has been remade or reborn. At that point, they decide, hey, we need to eat because we're hungry, and everyone's getting hangry and annoyed with each other. We get a little interaction where Cassian realizes that Amren is not eating. She doesn't actually eat food. So he just takes her plate and pours half of it on his plate. Azriel, of course, being Azriel, apologizes for it, or at least tries to. And Amren's response was, well, if you haven't treated, or if he hasn't learned your tricks in the last 100 or 500 years, then he's probably not going to learn them at this point. At Feyre, I don't think I want to know what it is that Amren actually eats. As they're sitting around the table, Feyre is looking at everything that they're wearing. Mor has dressed up to kind of match the level of dressiness that Feyre has on. Rhys also is more dressed up than usual, but Cassian and Azriel are in their flying leathers, their fighting leathers. They haven't changed. They're not trying to change. They're just being themselves. And Amren walked in with just the simple night court attire, not super fancy, but not super casual. She's somewhere in the middle. And Feyre is realizing that this is, a family dinner, not an official court gathering, but that she feels like they're not pretending. They are exactly who they are in this instance, and they'd worn whatever they wanted to wear. And this is where she's, again, starting to understand the differences between Rhysand's inner circle and Tamlin's court, that there is such a difference between the two, that Rhysand's is a family, whereas Tamlin's is a court ruled by him. And that's a huge difference. We get a lot of backstory into how the Illyrians and Rhysand met. So I'll sum it up real quick. They have different perspectives, different times when they came into a certain camp, but eventually they end up coming into the same Illyrian camp. They become friends. They beat each other up a little bit beforehand, but then they become friends and they continue to grow in power. And it's Rhysand's mom who first brings him the Illyrian camp. She stays with him because she wants him to learn to defend himself without his power. So that's why she's brought him to the Illyrian camp so he can train. And it's about 20 years that go by where she is there with him, tutoring him in the evenings. He ends up bringing Cassian to her as well, and then Cassian lives with them and is tutored by. And then they continue growing as fighters. They bring Azrael in at one point, and like I said, it's 20 years between the time they get there and when Rhysand's father first comes to see what is going on with his son. And it's at that point that Rhysand's dad realizes that not only is Rhysand getting really close to having as much, if not more, power than him, but that Rhysand has also surrounded himself with some really powerful people in the sense that even though Azrael and Cassian are bastards, they are the two most powerful Illyrian warriors in history as well. And we get into, some information on the power that Illyrians have. They call it the killing power, and it reminds me so much of the witches in Throne of Glass, where they have like some immortal grace, but they don't have any like outward power other than to die, and then a burst of power happens, and that's how the witches are able to kill large amounts of people because they're essentially like a bomb. The killing power that the Illyrians have is very similar. It doesn't kill them, but it is very hard to control. And I love the way Rhysand explains it to Feyre. It's saying the difference between taking a bucket of paint and throwing it on a canvas versus taking a paintbrush. Using a siphon is like taking a paintbrush with their power. In most cases, Illyrians are only given one siphon. We do find out later in the book that Azrael and Cassian have 7 siphons each. So like an insane amount of power. So just like in Throne of Glass, where we had all of these different super powerful beings, we now have Rhysand, who's super powerful, Amryn, who's more powerful than him, Mor, who's his third, so she has to be more powerful than Azrael and Cassian, but we don't know what her power is. And then Azrael and Cassian being the most powerful Illyrians. And then we have Feyre, who's now been added, and she is essentially all of the High Lords combined, which is crazy to think about. We do get a little depressing part. Feyre asks, were you under the mountain? Because she needs to know it may or may not determine how she interacts with them. And they all say, no, none of us were under the mountain. You see the love and devotion between all of them in how they respond to that question. And it just breaks my heart. Sarah looks to Cassian and he is staring at Rhys with guilt and love on his face, so deep and agonized that some now splintered instinct had me almost reaching across the table to grip his hand. So we kind of learn at this point that Rhysand left his inner circle to guard Valaris when Amarantha came and when he went under the mountain and was stuck there. It doesn't go into a ton of detail, and we'll learn about it a little bit more later, but this is where we first get a sense that he did this in a sacrificing kind of way, knowing or thinking at least that he wouldn't be coming back, but knowing that his family, his inner circle, was protecting his city and by extension his court. And you can really see the family bonds that they have in their reaction to how much Rhysand had to endure under the mountain.
I liked there too, right before they had that conversation, where Moore added in, there's not one person in this city who's unaware of what went on outside these borders or of the cost, because it immediately answers Feyre's anger moment a few chapters before in telling, no, they are very happy and blessed and they know what and why they get to live the way they do. So it's not an unsullied life that they lead. It's just
Right. And they know what happened. And I think Feyre really understands that this group is going to do everything that they can for those they care about in the exact same manner that Feyre has done that, both for her human family and then for Tamlin and his people, who she didn't even know when she went under the mountain to get Tamlin. And now she's seeing that in other people outside of Tamlin's court. The Illyrians actually cut the wings of the women after they start their first period, and that's a way to keep them grounded and to keep them, there for breeding. That's their sole purpose for women in the Illyrian camps. Rhysand's mom pushed off, getting her period as much as possible. She starved herself, exercised a lot, did everything she possibly could. But when she turned 18, it finally came. And so when the camp lords tried to hold her down to sever her wings, Rhysand's father winnowed in to meet with them to discuss the future war. And Rhysand describes it as the mate bond immediately snapped into place for his dad. So he immediately rescues her from her family, who are about to mutilate her. And then shortly after that, the mate bond snaps into place for her. His dad takes her right back to the night court, makes her his wife immediately. I like this part because we get a little foreshadowing. Through the years, his mom has tried, because she got to keep her wings and she loved flying so much, she has tried to get Rhys's dad to overrule those laws in the Illyrian camps and get them to stop cutting the wings. And we know that she doesn't get to because Rhysand's dad knows the war is coming and he wants the Illyrians to fight for him, and he doesn't want to, rock the boat because he wants them to fight for him in the war. But it is actually Rhysand who we find out has stopped that rule. He has banished it. No one is allowed to cut the wings of females anymore. And we end with Feyre saying, I agree to work with you and these people. She does tell them a little bit about themselves. And I love that she and Cassian kind of have like a little connection, because when Cassian was younger, he was also thrown out in the cold, dealt with starvation, didn't have a home, had to fight for his clothes, all of that. So they have a connection because of the past that they've dealt with. No one else in Rhysand's court, as far as we know, has ever been on the brink of starvation before. So I love that she finally has someone who understands what that was like to go through. So she agrees to work with them, and Rhysand's response is, okay, great, we start tomorrow. Like literally, we're going to start doing something tomorrow. 48 hours after she leaves the spring court, and he already has tasks for her, which I just love. I don't love what the task is, but I'm glad he actually gave her one. So he kind of goes into, we know there's a war coming, and I'm pretty sure the King of Hybern is stealing things from us because he wants to resurrect Jurian. And Jurian, we knew from book 1, that was the bone finger on Amarantha's necklace and the eye in her ring that she had taken from him after she killed him because he killed her sister. And when Amarantha dies, no one is able to find the adder afterwards. So it is assumed that it is the adder who takes that bone finger and eye ring back to the King of Hybern. So Rhysand is asking Amren, is it possible to do? If so, how would it be done? And Amren's response is the King of Hybern has to have heard that Feyre was remade, and it is therefore possible to happen, but that he'll have to do it differently to be able to resurrect Jurian. So they link all of the slaughtering and the massacres of the temples to the King of Hybern, is the assumption that he is trying to do something, gather pieces to create something to bring Jurian back. The only thing they can think of as far as who to talk to about it is the bone carver in the prison. At this point, we don't know what the prison is. There's a little bit of discussion as far as who's going to go into the prison to talk to the bone carver. Amren says she'll never go, which we find out why later in the chapters. But Rhys says he's not going to talk to anyone except maybe Feyre. And that's when Rhys says, yes, Feyre and I are going to go, and we'll go talk to him. And they all look to Feyre because, of course, Rhysand always gives her a choice. She agrees, and she's essentially like, well, how bad can it be? And everybody is just like, bad. It can be really bad. So that's where we're going to end, as our next chapter jumps into chapter 16 and the prison. Any other thoughts, comments, things that we want to bring up for this one? I feel like we went a little bit long on this one too, but that's okay. What do
One
you got?
huge thing is we start seeing, and you know me, I'm all about self-power and getting yourself back and your color back, your flamingo back, however you want to phrase it. But Moore's reaction with Feyre, and Feyre starting to compare her to Ianthe, especially when Feyre is like, well, you don't think it's going to be stupid if I try and fight, when her and Cassian have that moment. And Moore immediately, let me tell you two things because I've been where you've been. Like she has that someone sees me, understands me, and I haven't shared my trauma, but we're there, we're linked up. And that's almost, in my mind, that almost felt like it didn't say anything snapped in place like a mating bond, but almost felt like a friendship, like a soul sister
Right?
snap because they gave her the power to be like, all right, well, you know me, I'm with you. I feel like that was almost learning all of their stories and then them accepting and seeing her as what tied her into it in that moment.
Yes. I'm going to take it a step further because I'm glad you brought that up because I definitely completely missed that part. So Cassian offers to train her because when Feyre tells them her backstory, she said, I taught myself how to fight to feed my family. That's when her and Cassian have the little moment about starvation. And then Cassian says, well, I will train you on how to fight so that you're prepared. So she has that connection with Cassian in regards to they both know what it's like to starve. And then you mentioned that she kind of spews some of the nonsense that the Spring Court pushed into her, forced into her, and kind of is like, well, aren't other courts going to be upset if they know I have their power or they know I'm training or learning to fight? And you're right, that's when Moore jumps in and they have that connection in the sense that Moore has dealt with something similar and overcome it. And now she's going to help Feyre overcome it in a way that we thought Amarantha was going to help her overcome it, and she didn't. So Moore is going to be the actual friend that Feyre thought Amarantha, or not Amarantha, Ianthe was going to be to her. So I love that because now we have a connection with Cassian and we have a connection with Moore. And she and Amren are both made. So there is even a connection with Amren. And we know later on in the books, we're going to get a connection with Asriel as well. So she essentially has a strong connection to every single person in Rhysand's inner circle. And she had the complete opposite in the Spring Court to the point where she didn't even name any of Tamlin's friends. Lucian is the only one whose name we know, and that's only because he's been there since the beginning. Crazy difference between the two. Thank you. I'm glad you pointed that out.
It's so good.
I know. I just love getting to see all the banter between them and like I said, how they act like like a family, like siblings. We kind of get a feeling that there might be a little bit more or some romantic feelings towards some of the characters, at least specifically Asriel towards Moore, based on, when Feyre catches him watching more and Moore's reaction sometimes. 'Cause that's what we have to remember is that we are seeing this from Feyre's perspective. So everything that's mentioned are things that Feyre is cataloging in her brain that she is noticing. So we do start to see some things going on with Asriel and Moore, even at this initial meeting with both of them. So we'll talk about that more later on. Awesome. All right.
That's it for episode 7 of our A Court of Mist and Fury deep dive. Thank you for joining us. And if you haven't already, just read it, okay?